So, okay, what's going on? Well, essentially, Temuera Morrison, who played, of course, Jango Fett and Boba Fett, was at a convention in Australia and he was asked something about Boba Fett, to which he said this. Today was another interesting day on Twitter and the internet where I learned that Temuera Morrison has come out and actually spoke his mind in regards to what happened to Boba Fett in his own show, in the Book of Boba Fett, as well as in the Mandalorian Season 3, which he was supposedly supposed to be in. Let's go ahead and read the articles that are weighing in on this and covering it right now. And I want to cover it myself too. So across the board, we got a million different articles covering this. People on Twitter, YouTube, the internet, Instagram, TikTok. It's just going nuts right now. And I want to give my view on it too, because I think this is something really important as it ties into a lot of the things that we've been discussing over the years with the rather mismanagement, I would say, of Star Wars. Back in 2019, The Mandalorian saved Star Wars. It was a dark time. The sequel trilogy was coming to a close, with J.J. Abrams' Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, and fans were very divisive, still are. I think toxic positivity is one of the biggest problems in today's fandom, but we can get to that in another video on its own. Being a Star Wars fan back then was rough, but Jon Favreau's new Star Wars series managed to be developed secretly with Disney Plus and was the flagship series for the streaming platform. The rest is history, as The Mandalorian remains one of the most popular Star Wars projects ever made, with fans loving Grogu and Din Djarin. Their story has evolved from being a bounty hunter collecting their bounty to a father and son dynamic that very few can achieve on the big screen. You know, unless you're playing God of War or The Last of Us or, anything like that. Unfortunately, not everything about the Mando is amazing. For instance, the Book of Boba Fett had one major problem near the end of Season 1. Boba Fett wasn't in the show. And not to mention that, he was also sidelined the whole time by other characters, and he really wasn't showing us exactly the Boba Fett that we got to see in the original trilogy, and many might say we barely got to see Boba. But what about the extensive amounts of legends, lore comics, books, and other media, like in the games that we got to see with Boba, drawing a very descriptive image of how badass, cold, and ruthless he was? Of course characters change over time, of course people evolve, of course people change their ways and their opinions and their thoughts. But with Boba Fett, I think it would have been more interesting to have him a little more akin to the Boba that we knew than completely changing 180, much like Luke did, much like Obi-Wan did, and then having to find themselves. It's like this common theme and this formula that Disney likes to interject into George Lucas's already established characters, which I have a problem with. Boba Fett wasn't in the show. For some reason, Din Djarin had to come into the series and take over the spotlight for over 2 episodes for one season. To explain why Grogu was suddenly with Din Djarin in Season 3, which I've made a video on by itself, and I think that was one of the biggest mistakes that Disney has done. Forget the sequel trilogy, this is definitely up there with them. I think what they set up in Season 2, what Jon Favreau set up at the end of Season 2 with Luke taking Grogu, was a beautiful move, and it kept you hungry, wondering what's going to happen with Grogu now. The fact that they retconned that and changed it probably for some board executive piping in and saying, I think we should put Grogu back in there. It'll probably rise up the analytics. Big mistake in my opinion, and that's only my speculation. While fans thought the series would continue without Grogu for a small amount of time, Disney wanted Din Djarin to find a way to include the bounty hunter and his little green my little green friend in Boba Fett's show. Unfortunately, Temuera Morrison never got the call to join the cast for the Mando 3, and he shared his feelings at a recent convention. And this recent convention, for those who want to know, was at the Supernova Comic-Con and Gaming Convention in Melbourne, Australia, where Temuera Morrison was asked if he was supposed to have a cameo appearance in The Mandalorian Season 3. The actor gave an entertaining response on stage, which means that he was probably lighthearted about it, most likely, and claimed that he was supposed to be in it, but his phone never rang. So let's go ahead and read the actual message. Well, that Mando guy stole a few chapters of my book. It was painful watching him turn up with some black new lethal sword, the Darksaber. And the way he turned up in my Book of Boba, he just destroyed everybody. I'm sure this guy is ruining my show, but I couldn't say anything. I'm not the writer, so I have to bear it, I guess. And for me, there's a lot more he said. For me, first of all, he probably approached this with a smile. Of course, I wasn't there. He probably approached this with a smile. He probably was very lighthearted about it and laughing about it. But if this is what he says on a public stage, Imagine what he's saying with his true emotions, in my opinion, behind the scenes, where he doesn't really have to put on such a happy face like everything is okay, and, taking care of Disney in this sense. I would imagine that he would have been very pissed off, with his closest friends being like, what the f is going on here? And that's one of the things that angers me the most, and we saw this with Mark Hamill when he was discussing the role and character of Luke Skywalker in the sequel trilogy, in The Last Jedi. And he did this with Rian Johnson. They had many meetings regarding how Mark fundamentally disagreed with everything that Rian was doing with his character, but at the end of the day, it's not his story, it's not his character anymore, so he just has to go along with the script that they give him because he's a paid actor. That's it. Basically, they're just fulfilling the dreams of the writers, almost like really talented puppets, and in some cases, some really aren't that talented. Right here, Temuera Morrison agrees that Mandalorian coming into his show like that, stealing the thunder, did indeed ruin his show and take the spotlight away from him, which a lot of us have been thinking and saying. Sure, the episodes were amazing, they were awesome, I loved them, I think they were some of the best Mandalorian episodes to date. However, should they have been in the Book of Boba Fett show? I don't think so, and I think a lot of us would be a lot more kind-hearted about this and relaxed about it if Boba Fett was a lot more Boba Fett-y than how he was portrayed in the show. I think a lot of us can discern the major difference between Boba Fett in Season 2 of The Mandalorian when he showed up for his armor, compared to the Boba Fett we got in the Boba Fett show. Then the actor shared that he believed that Disney was dealing with some cutbacks on Star Wars content, which is why certain shows like the Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi might not have a second season in development. I think there was a few changes going on. We also come under the big umbrella known as Disney now too. So it's one of the last few conversations we had in LA. The conversation started like, oh look, we're having a few changes, we're having a few cutbacks. And when you hear that at the other end of the line, it's no good trying to negotiate any more money, that's for sure. But we'll see what happens. Now, something else the other article didn't include, which this one does, which is we got this covered.com. I was supposed to be in The Mandalorian Season 3, but nobody rang me. I was waiting for the phone call in New Zealand, waiting and wanting to give up. So I believe that there must have been some different scripts for The Mandalorian Season 3, as the one that we got was probably the most safe, basic, in my opinion, boring season that we could have gotten for the Mando. I mean, it's hard even to say safe, because really, nothing happened. And Moff Gideon coming back and trying to clone himself using the Force, I mean, why didn't Palpatine just do that? He had the Kaminoans at his disposal. It just seems like, Disney is really meddling and changing a lot of the scripts and things going around with the story that Jon Favreau has. But hey, that's just my theory. I don't want to start any rumors. That is not, of course, factual. That's just what I think is going on. Too many cooks in the kitchen telling Jon how to play with his toys. And so this is, I think, one of the major problems with Star Wars today under Disney's control is that it's just seeming like time and time again. And, let me give you a bit of a history. When the sequel trilogy came out, I was still extremely hopeful. I was really hopeful that this is the George Lucasfilm that I always knew and loved, the one that I wanted to work for as a little kid, and they always have Star Wars' best intentions in mind. I didn't understand until later when Daisy Ridley and John Boyega and other intellectuals came out with the actual facts and truth of behind-the-scenes stuff that us normies just watching on the other side of the screen wouldn't know, that I started to realize that maybe things aren't the way they used to be with George. And then I started to hear things from mutual friends of George Lucas. And that's when I started to really realize, okay, I am holding out hope for something that doesn't exist. And so with this pattern of different information that we've been getting over the years, I now see that Disney really does like to put their finger into the minds and scripts of the creatives that they hire to make these projects. And a lot of the time, the people that they're bouncing back and forth with and firing this dude, hiring that guy, firing this girl, it just seems like they got too much say in what's going on. And I really don't think that they have the Star Wars homework under their belt to really be making these kinds of decisions and altering stories that otherwise would have probably been much better had they not meddled and stepped in. I wonder when they're going to learn. Anyways, I stand with Temuera Morrison, always have, always will, and I don't think this is a Temuera Morrison versus Disney kind of thing. That being said, I stand with Temuera Morrison always, and whether he was extremely lighthearted about it or not on stage, you have to eventually look at things logistically and realistically and say, look, the actors themselves, who Temuera Morrison was trained by George Lucas on who Jango Fett was, on who Boba Fett was, and is now having a say in where he thinks his character should go, and is thinking that this is now straying far from the path of what once was and what it was supposed to be and what it originated as with George Lucas's character. And so it would be wise to think, maybe this dude who was trained by the guy who created all of these characters and this whole story and the reason we're all here to begin with might have a point as to what he's talking about. Maybe he knows a little something that we don't. And on top of that, I think it's pretty weird they didn't have Boba Fett in these pins here, these badges for Star Wars Celebration. If indeed they weren't there, maybe there are more badges that we're not aware of or aren't in this post. But if that's the case, it's a little weird. Whatever. I hope you guys enjoyed this vid. Let me know what you think about it. As always, keep your discourse polite and respectful. Find me on Twitter. I love making a wave on there and having some fun just by voicing my own opinions, because in today's day and age, that's really frowned upon. Unless you consume and accept everything with a smile on your face, regardless of the taste or smell. Have a great day, and may the Force be with you. I'll see you all in the next video.